A lot of action that we've had, and before we unpack all of the latest, I want to get to what we're happening on really the three fronts of the war now. But before I come to you, I want to introduce another guest, retired Colonel Miri Eisin, who's joining us. She's the director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism at Reichman University in Israel. Miri, thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk to you because as we were speaking to our correspondent, Robert Swift, who's up near the Lebanon border, he was speaking about those recent strikes in Syria, really preparing for possibly a much more wider regional war, and that's exactly what the United States is preparing for as well, sending in a new fighter squadron, F-16 fighter jets to the Middle East, all kind of in preparation for this to really escalate further.
There's no question right now that we are looking at the challenges that everybody understood from Saturday, October 7th, meaning Hamas started this attack, Hamas committed those atrocities, but we've always been looking at what is Hezbollah doing, because I remind us, Nicole, that we were expecting an attack like this from Hezbollah. They prepared similar type of plans. They were practicing and training for similar type of plans. So when we look towards Hezbollah, we look towards Lebanon. For the last decade, since the Syrian war against Bashar al-Assad and the retaking by Bashar al-Assad, Hezbollah have deployed their own forces on the Golan Heights, and there's been into Syria itself different Shiite Hezbollah-backed groups that are the ones that are firing against Israel. So that's most definitely what's been under the surface for the last 2.5 weeks, and it just keeps creeping higher and higher.
Well, Miri, you bring up such a good point, because Hezbollah has truly been the greater threat for Israel for years now. Hamas was kind of under our noses the entire time, but proves that they were a very large threat as well. And so now as the military is preparing for this ground incursion in the south, saying that they are going to completely eliminate Hamas, is now the time also to completely eliminate Hezbollah, as we've proven that our threats are sometimes even greater than we think they are?
It's so interesting, it's like we want to talk about this on a theoretical basis. So I want to be clear. Does the IDF have the capability? Does the Israeli country have the capability? Absolutely. As we see in trying to and going forward in eliminating Hamas, Hamas is within part of the Palestinian civilians that are inside the Gaza Strip that both support him or don't support them, but they are all interconnected. It's very difficult to do the difference between them. And so when we attack Hamas weapons, Hamas caches of weapons, Hamas tunnels, Hamas booby traps, and Hamas terrorists, there are civilians that are surrounding them, both supporters and non-supporters, that we keep telling to move. So to your question, Nicole, what do we do with Hezbollah that is in the same type of situation, but in Lebanon, a sovereign country, a country that has in and around 10 million people? Hezbollah, Arabic-speaking Shiites in Lebanon are part of that country. So to eliminate it, as I said, the IDF and the state of Israel, we have the capability. The price is one that the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people will pay. Very difficult to decide.
Miri Eisin, thank you. I want you to stay with us, but I want to turn to my guest in studio, Guy Azriel. Guy, just yesterday we saw from the United Nations Security Council definitely some major claims coming from the Security General himself, Antonio Guterres, about these brutal attacks October 7th, claiming that maybe there was a reason behind them.
Yes, a lot of backlash, a lot of fire from Israel, obviously following this remark from Antonio Guterres, saying that the attack did not happen in a vacuum. Obviously, Israel was not willing to accept any excuse for this Hamas attack. Guterres later going on Twitter saying the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the horrific attacks by Hamas. Those horrendous attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Nonetheless, Israel has called on Guterres to resign from office, saying that he justifies a crime against humanity. And amid that, a lot of news coming from the US as well regarding Israel's plans in terms of the ground operation in Gaza. President Biden was asked yesterday whether Israel should delay its ground operation, and his response: the Israelis are making their own decisions. We also heard from White House spokesperson John Kirby about the possibility of a ceasefire. Maybe let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We want, as I said from the beginning, we want to see all measure of protection for civilians, and pauses in operation is a tool and a tactic that can do that for temporary periods of time.
So does that mean
that is not the same as saying a ceasefire? Again, right now we believe a ceasefire benefits Hamas, a general ceasefire.
Yeah, so obviously the question of the ground invasion is something that is looming here in Israel 19 days into this war since the Hamas attack. Many Israelis are asking themselves, what is Israel waiting for? Obviously, there are so many different factors involved, including the readiness of the IDF, preparing the operational guidelines to the troops on how to eliminate Hamas. This is not an easy task. And amid all of that, a lot of talks about certain negotiations for the release of more of the kidnapped in Gaza. We saw 4 women released so far. Obviously, there are things under the surface that we are not aware of as well.
Well, and speaking of just those hostages who have been released, now reports also the IDF is dropping flyers throughout the Gaza Strip, urging any Palestinians with any information to come forward about these hostages. But how reliable is that, and how likely are any Palestinians who actually use this so-called secure line? I have to imagine there's a lot of fear.
Obviously, look, the IDF is investing a lot of efforts, both in terms of the operational efforts and the intelligence efforts. So that is certainly one of them. Obviously, also interrogating or at least questioning those who managed to return from captivity. We heard from one of them, Yochevet, yesterday, speaking about a massive operation of tunnels there underground. We know that they have been separated. She herself was part of a group of 25 people, later separated into 5, each of them being taken care of by a separate guard. So that is a very complicated task. But if the IDF will get information, at least about a group of people that they know their exact whereabouts, obviously we can expect that they would do whatever it takes to release them.
Okay, and as you're talking about everything that is happening in the Gaza Strip, I want to turn to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who is in the south right now near the Gaza border. Jonathan, as we were hearing from Guy just about the imminent possibility of this ground operation, whenever it does happen, it keeps being delayed 19 days now. But what exactly are we preparing for? Is this going to be full troops going in, or is it going to be a mixture of troops on the ground, little by little, airstrikes? What should we expect?
The truth is no one really knows. No one really knows because the notion was a week ago and 2 weeks ago that it's just about to happen. And now we're hearing more and more voices saying that Israel should go in, but only after basically pounding the Gaza Strip, pounding Hamas compounds as much as possible from the air. There was a sort of an understanding that Hamas was well aware that after such an attack, Israel would come in, and therefore was well prepared for that. And going in right now with full power would be sort of falling into a trap. So maybe it would be better first to pound from the air, and second to have sort of a siege on Gaza, not so much on food and water, but especially on fuel. Why fuel? Because that is something that Hamas would need to keep its bunkers going, and if fuel does not go in, therefore eventually there'll not be enough electricity to run to provide, for example, air conditioning or communications in the Hamas bunkers, and then the leaders would have to eventually pop up and eventually be killed. There are many in Israel that now believe that this would be the right thing to do. First, pound Gaza from the air, have a siege as much as you can, and only then come in with a lot of ground forces. But what will eventually happen, we simply do not know and have to wait.
Well, and Jonathan, meanwhile, as we're talking about what is being withheld from the Gaza Strip, we know that also more terrorists are still trying to infiltrate to Israel. Just yesterday, we saw an incident near Zakim Beach. The IDF also now striking back at some of the tunnels that the terrorists used to infiltrate into Israel.
Yes, Hamas still has surprises for Israel. If, for example, on Monday there were far fewer alarms and rocket alerts throughout Israel, and there's perhaps a notion that they do not have the ability to fire as much as they did in the first few days. Then yesterday, Tuesday, was completely different. There were several alarms in central Israel and in Beersheba, and Hamas proved that it could still fire, and it also proved that it still has the possibility to at least try and carry out some sophisticated infiltration attacks. This one specifically in Zikim was thwarted. It's not clear exactly how many terrorists were killed, but it is clear that there's quite a large number of them trying to infiltrate from the sea. So this thing is far from over, and Hamas, despite all these Israeli actions, still has quite a lot of abilities.
Well, and meanwhile, Jonathan, I know we're keeping an eye on the south there, but also another front, the West Bank, continues to be very hot. We heard overnight also the IDF striking and killing 3 Palestinians in Jenin.
That is true. Israel is using the fact that all the attention is now on Gaza to have quite a large operation against terror cells in the West Bank, mostly Hamas. There's always, before this war began, the concern that an operation that would be too strong in the West Bank would lead to a response from Gaza. This concern is now obviously no longer there, and Israel is acting strongly against Hamas in the West Bank. This is a clear opportunity to get rid of Hamas, not only here in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. A very strong Israeli interest, and this would also be a Palestinian interest. The Palestinian Authority does not need a strong Hamas presence in the West Bank, Israel. In the West Bank, and Israel clearly doesn't need that either.
Jonathan Regev reporting from Israel's south near the Gaza border. Thank you so much. Now I want to come back to Guy Azriel, who's joining me in studio. As we were just speaking to Jonathan about the 3 fronts of this war, really, I think it's important to remind our viewers about how hot the West Bank has been for months now. Nightly arrest operations, nightly raids. Really all eyes were on the West Bank, yet now that seems to be kind of put to the background.
A completely different reality from what we were used to for so many months now. We've been reporting here in studio about the influx of terror attacks across the West Bank, also some of them inside Israeli territory, but emanating from the West Bank, mainly from the northern West Bank, the areas of Jenin and Nablus. The IDF has been conducting nightly raids, nightly arrests to take these terror operatives during their operations. At the same time, now Gaza has transformed the entire attention, obviously, of the IDF and of the world media. But the fact is that these terror operatives do continue to be active in the West Bank. That is still a danger for Israel, obviously, with the fact that it is much, much easier to infiltrate Israel from the West Bank, as you know, we at least thought that it is difficult to do so from Gaza. Well, that fence did not hold up, but for now, the makeup of the troops on the southern border is such that doesn't allow that free infiltration. Much easier in the West Bank, and therefore it is very important for the IDF to be vigilant, for the Shin Bet, and obviously they have much better intelligence there than they do in Gaza.
Well, and meanwhile, I want to turn back to retired Colonel Miri Eisin as we're talking about just the intelligence that we need in order to prevent these attacks. The IDF really stretched onto all forces right now, not only the northern border, the southern border, the West Bank, and abroad. All of this intelligence is crucial, though, in continuing to prevent these attacks, continuing to thwart the different terror cells that remain all throughout Israel and its borders.
Have, Nicole, and that's something, as I said before, that the IDF and certainly the intelligence community know how to stretch and know how to do. Obviously, it's very challenging, but let's be clear right now. Hamas declared all-out terror war on October 7th. What they're trying to do right now is to get the West Bank Hamas supporters and terrorists to come on and out. They are obviously hand in hand with Hezbollah in the north, and as we've said, Hezbollah is 10 times stronger. And we haven't even mentioned in our discussion this morning, Iran behind. So when we're talking about yes-no ground operation, it isn't just trying to get to and destroy Hamas capabilities, trying to get and rescue the hostages. It is also about the broader sense. None of us, Nicole, want in any way for Hamas to be portrayed as winners. And right now, they're continuing attacks of going against Zikim, of trying to do things inside the West Bank. That's them for their audience, their base, trying to show, see, we're in a war, we're doing well. They are not. They started a terror war. We are eliminating them. They are hiding behind the civilians, and they do have a lot of supporters, and that's part of the challenge all of the time. Those supporters can surround them, and when we target the terrorists, we've been sending out leaflets to civilians in the Gaza Strip and saying, don't stay around the terrorists, because if you do, we will see you as terrorists as well. We're telling them then that up front. So I really do think that in that sense, it may or may not be ground operation today or next week, but this issue of Hamas, the connection to Hezbollah, that greater connection in behind to Iran, that's all part of the decision-making process on when to do it, how to do it, and hovering around everything, the hostage issue.
And Miri, you're talking just about this greater threat that we all know, and it's Iran and all of Iranians' backed proxies that they're using to fight in this war. However, as Iran and other outside threats continue to get involved, it seems that other outside sources, the United States now reports that Australia sending troops to the Middle East as well, all backing Israel and other factors in the Middle East against Iran. So I hate to even pose this, but as Iran continues to get involved, is it beneficial as Israel continues to receive this support from Western allies?
Right now, what we're seeing is the response of the entire international community that is on this side, that understands what we're talking about, that this threat is not a threat against Israel. This is not about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I say it with a heavy heart in that sense, and I've said it so many times before, the biggest losers of Hamas's terror attack are the Palestinian people. When we look at the participation of the United States and at both the visits and the behind-the-scenes actions, all for diplomacy, certainly when it comes to the hostages, but all of the world right now is worried because Hamas has called Muslims in the world, that's 2 billion people. This is not about Islam, but that's what Hamas is trying to do. And we have already been through horrific wars in, a decade ago with the rise of ISIS. Hamas is trying in that sense out of the Palestinian world, and this is not the Palestinian world, but they're trying to raise those voices again. So this is not going to help Iran. This is going to be very clear cut, and it isn't a question of believing. We have both the capabilities and capacities to destroy these terror forces. It's not about the civilians. The price will be high. The price will be high.
Miri Eisin, thank you, as we continue to keep our eye on all of the different proxies continuing to target Israel, but also, as you said, the threat to all of the Western countries. Now, one of the items that is absolutely complicating this is the hostage situation.